I do want to start off with something very, very simple. And I know I've
Mhm.
asked this before, but what teacher had the biggest impact on you as a student, and which teacher had the biggest impact on you creatively? You're such a creative, brilliant person. And
Oh, thank you.
I'm assuming that's just the skill set you have, but I'm also assuming that a teacher may have nurtured that along the way.
Yes, the first name that comes to mind is Mrs. Seville, my fifth grade teacher. I cite her like all the time when I'm asked a question similar to this. Yes, Mrs. Seville. She was my teacher in fourth and fifth grade. And she probably gave me the experience I most fondly remember from elementary school. She had us do two films. There was a film in fourth grade and a film in fifth grade. The film in fourth grade was something geometry based. The film in fifth grade was an anti-drug video. And I remember acting in those films and being a part of the writing process and the editing process and just bringing these projects to life together. It was a very rewarding and fun experience. And when I became a teacher, I thought I want to do the same thing with my students as well. So she definitely had that impact on me. She planted that seed, and 30 years later, here I am making videos, not only with my students, but with myself as well.
And it's interesting because I feel like we carry on the legacy of our teachers. We teach the way that all the amazing teachers we had or we think we had taught. And it's one thing,
Yes.
like I always think about, like, how did my teachers inspire me? Like, how did they get me to care? So my next
Mhm.
question is, how did your teachers, obviously Miss Seville, but how did your teachers inspire you as a kid, or what ways did they kind of engage you in a very powerful way?
Well, the ones that stick out are the ones that thought outside the box, to use a cliche. So again, going back to Mrs. Seville, she thought, okay, I'm going to teach these kids about tessellations and geometry, but what would be more exciting than a worksheet? She thought, let's make a video. So I remember going around the school and finding all these geometric shapes, and we made that connection to math. So I think taking a subject out of pen and paper and applying it in a different way in the real world is a great way to engage our students, because they need to get up, they need to move, they need to create. And I think a lot of our students are naturally creative. And if you can find a way to make the curriculum artistic or find a creative way to teach the curriculum, I think it's a great way to engage them.
And it's funny you said, 'cause over the last like 5 or 10 years, I would say I've tried to find every creative way to incorporate music, art, performance.
Hmm.
I have my students write skits for historical events, how they think
Yes.
that.
Yes.
Again, like, those are such simple skills. They learn the material, but it teaches them powerful skills that they'll need later on in life, because it's just like those skill sets as a performer, you will apply to every aspect of your life, whether you work in entertainment or performing arts, or if you're in an office or you're managed. So I always try to think of engaging ways to incorporate your world into my world, because history is a really exciting subject, but it could be made really boring depending on how you teach it. And I feel like there's so much room for that. So
Yes, yes. And that also reminds me of another teacher I had in middle school. Like they had us do create comic books to summarize a historical event. So I,
create
you know,
comic
so
books.
I when I, yeah, comic books. So I not the war is funny, but I mean,
No, no, no.
but you
But
know what I
it's
mean.
like, yeah,
You would take a historical event and tell it in a comic book format. So you could illustrate and you had to, when you're writing a comic book, the text is a little more condensed. So you really have to think of how to best summarize what you want to say. So it forces you to use these other skills. And I think that challenge made it very engaging for us.
well, it's like I had my students create presidential superheroes. They had to create presidents as
Mhm.
superheroes, and then create their superpowers, like based on what their presidency, what the positive things that came from the president, which is always funny when they came up with the names and
Mhm.
the identity. But again, like, those things I love. And I'm sure you feel the same way. If I don't have fun teaching, they're not having fun learning. And
That I completely agree.
yeah, so
And
it's
going back to the president thing, do you remember that TikTok trend where choose your own character and it would be people as video game characters?
yeah.
That would work really well with the presidents. You
Oh,
could
that
have a
would
kid,
absolutely. Yeah, the
what
choose
are their strengths, what do they accomplish? Yeah.
that
Like,
would work very well.
so
Again, you
an
have
idea
all
to
their
throw at you.
stats. No, that's definitely something. I will gladly credit you when I do that in class. Now, as I mentioned before, you create such amazing content. Uh, you're obviously most recognized for your teacher themed content. How do you express your authentic self with the content you create? Like how much of you, because obviously you're providing content which we can all relate to as educators and the experience, but how
Mhm.
do you kind of share
Mhm.
your authentic self, like your personnel and your identity within the content you create?
I have 21 years of experience to draw from. And I'm also, I have my ear to the ground, like listening to what educators are experiencing and going through. So I synthesize those things, and I try to find uh, a clip that I think exemplifies the experiences that we are going through. And hopefully the message will land when I post it online. I mean, I think that's pretty much it. Just paying attention, listening to my colleagues, and just drawing from my experiences and observing what's going on around me.
And
And I got to also present it in a way that feels right for my personality. So, I'm not there are content creators who can sit in their car and tell a story and they're super engaging. That's not me. I need some
not
type
me
of gimmick
either.
or
Yeah.
cute little editing to or some concept to make my idea come through. So I got to find concepts and methods that work for me, because for me sitting in a car telling a story, that would not work for me. I would not be as engaging as some other creators are.
And I'm the same way.
You have to,
That would
yeah,
not work for me.
you have to know your strengths.
Yeah, you
Yeah, you have to
definitely.
know your strengths.
Yeah, because I would never do any of the content that you create because or anything similar because just it's way out of my league as a creator. My niche. But speaking of
Yeah.
you, I'm sorry. We're gonna say.
Oh, I was gonna say, there is something to be said for going out on a limb and trying something new, because you just never know.
Yeah.
Uh, like 5 years ago, I didn't think I would be creating content and throwing myself in front of a camera the way I have. And I find that creativity can be like a muscle. The more you do it, the stronger you can become at it. Uh, so I would say just venture out of your comfort zone, try something new. It could flop or it could not. You could discover something else that you like, or that or discover a strength that you didn't know you had.
I love that. And it actually made me think of something else I wanted to ask you. Because I obviously I shared how your content's therapy for us. Is your
Mhm.
content therapy for you? Is that a way to share and vent? And does it make you feel better when you share those messages as well in a very humorous way, in a very fun way?
Absolutely, yes. As you know, teaching is very challenging, and you need to be able to laugh at the absurdities that we go through sometimes. So so yeah, so content creation for me is a way to process what I go through individually and what we're going through as a collective. And when I put it out there, the cherry on top is when other teachers relate to it or can laugh at it as well. That's a really nice feeling.
I love that. Now, how can humor, because again, you just mentioned it. I like to use humor to laugh, to not cry sometimes. And we're allowed to be serious and to joke. And we can't, I mean,
Mhm.
it's interesting when I get attacked for making a joke about teaching and everybody's like, oh, you hate your job. I'm like, no, it's a joke. Like
Mhm.
if you don't have a sense of humor, you should not be in education because you need that to kind of
Right.
survive. But how might you
Right.
be utilized to address like sensitive topics or difficult subjects? And how can it help promote understanding and empathy? Because like when I see your content, I appreciate as an educator, but I also think it helps non-educators understand and empathize
Mhm.
with us that we love what we do, but these are problems that we have to deal with as well.
Yeah, I've heard that from non-educators as well. Sometimes they'll look at what I post and I'm like, oh, I didn't know it was like that. And then there are others. I mean, there are a lot of trolls out there who will just hate on teachers no matter what. I mean, you can post something very positive, they'll find something wrong with it anyway, and they'll
Always,
critique. So there,
always.
yeah. So those people, you just gotta not, first of all, don't engage, just let it go, block even, and just don't engage with that, because there are people out there who are just going to be negative no matter what. At the end of the day, you just have to express what you are thinking and feeling, and and hopefully the joke will translate to your audience. I mean, there's never a guarantee. There's always a chance that it could be misinterpreted. If that happens, learn from your mistake and move on and do better after that. Um, and I would also say, I think as educators, we do need to have we do need to be careful with how we phrase a joke. My rule of thumb is not to punch down.
Mhm.
So I no, I would not make jokes about students. I think it's fair to make a joke about how a challenging class can make you feel,
Yeah.
but to trash kids or their parents or their families, that's a line I don't cross. I think it's fair to punch up.
Yeah.
You can punch up at politicians or at policies or toxic bosses, that kind of thing. But don't punch down. And yeah, that's pretty much the rule of thumb I like to follow.
I had some really funny teachers, and not only dad jokes, but teachers who were just really funny and really clever. Did you have
Mhm.
funny teachers? And if so, like, how did that impact your learning? And if does any of it carry over into how you teach?
Hmm. Um, let's see, off the top of my head, did I have funny teachers? Not in elementary school. They were kind and sweet, but I wouldn't describe them as funny. I did have an algebra teacher that did do the dad jokes, but he was entertaining. He was engaging. He was fun to listen to. Um, but other than that, I can't think of other teachers that I had that were particularly funny.
I think humor is such an important thing for education. I always joke around and say if you can
Mhm.
make your students laugh, you can make them learn because it kind of sets that environment. How
Yes.
to what extent is the teacher's use of humor influential in overall classroom culture, academics, and attitudes toward learning? Because I've been in classes with teachers that were like dictators. I've been in classes that teachers that were very
Yeah.
light and fun and joked, and it just
Mhm.
felt different. How
Yeah.
important is
I wouldn't say humor is necessarily what's needed. I think your students need to know that you care about them, and you can do that with or without humor. So,
correct?
and that's what I think of when I think about my teachers, the ones that made an impact. I knew they weren't particularly funny, but I knew they cared about me and they loved me, and it was reciprocal. So, more important than humor is knowing that it's important for students to know that their teachers care about them.
Okay. Well, I have one last question in reference to that too. I know you humor is
Mhm.
it's not important, but in what ways can humor be used to create a positive, inclusive classroom environment? Or you, when I say humor too, we can relate to compassion as well and empathy as well. Because I
Mhm.
feel like you said,
Yes.
humor doesn't mean telling jokes. Humor means to me, it's definitely different layers to it.
Yeah, yeah. I think humor can really break down a barrier, and it lets students it allows students to feel a little more comfortable around you. And you mentioned this earlier. If you can make your students laugh, you can win them over. So, and I think with humor, it allows your students to see that you're human. It allows them to see that it's okay to laugh at absurdities together. There's something very bonding about humor and being able to laugh together.
I think self-deprecation, I put myself down a lot. Not that that's a positive thing, but it's like I
Yes.
try to get my students like you have to be able to criticize yourself and accept that it's not so serious. You know, it's okay
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
fail. It's okay if you mess up. It's okay if you make fun of yours. It's like I'm very not too self-deprecating, but I definitely use that to kind of let them know that it's okay to it's okay to let yourself mess up and not be so judgmental of it.
Oh yeah, yeah. I let them whenever I'm trying a new lesson, I let my kids know, listen, just so you know, I'm trying a brand new lesson. You're my guinea pigs. I've never tried this with anyone else. So if I mess up, I'm really sorry. And sometimes the lessons goes well. Other times it does flop, but they need to see that creative process. They need to see that it's okay to experiment and succeed. And it's okay to experiment and fail, and you learn from your mistakes and correct them, and you keep growing. I think that's important for a teacher to model as well.
Well, it's funny. I started doing, I don't know if you know Brad Montague. Uh, he's the
No.
creator of the Kid President. His social media
Yes. Okay.
producer, Brad.
Yes.
He does this thing where it's called epic fails, whereas people share their failures. So I
Hmm.
started doing that with my students where each week we share the failure we're most proud of, just to get them to
Oh, I
understand that
love
it's okay to
that.
fail. Like, so each week, like, what did you fail? Well, I tried this and it was miserable and I did a horrible job and I tried to cook and it bombed. And it's like, but it's like, and it makes them see failure completely differently and not being afraid of it, but
Mhm.
embracing it.
Yeah.
And it was so funny because I thought it was such a simple, brilliant thing to slowly change that mindset. And now my
Hmm.
students like enjoy saying, "Hey, Ferroni, guess what I failed at this week?" And it's like, but they don't realize that that's like they're taking chances. They're trying things. And I think it's such a great thing to say.
Totally, totally. And it's an important part of the creative process too. Yeah.
So now my next question is, for how many videos I see, how many takes and edits and hours of editing go into them? Or are you a one hit, one shot, one?
Oh, I am not a one-shot wonder. No. It takes sometimes I'll get really lucky and it's fine the first take. Other times it can take 2 or 3, 4 takes. The filming part is actually the fastest. The editing is what takes the longest. And sometimes when I'm editing something, I'll look at it, I'm like, no, that doesn't work. I'll need to go back and refilm it. So it's different every time. Sometimes it just falls into place. Other times it takes a few takes and lots of time editing.
It's so funny where I'll write up like ideas for videos and then I shoot them and I'm like, horrible. That's going on. Did not happen the way I thought it would. Did not happen the way I
Yeah,
thought it
yeah.
would. But a lesson
Yeah,
learned.
that happens too.
Yeah.
There's stuff I've started, I filmed it. I'm like, no, it's not gonna work. So I'm gonna cross that idea out or let it marinate some more, and maybe I'll come back to it another time. But yeah, that happened. It's part of the creative process. Yeah.
Thank you for
Yeah.
doing this and kind of talking about your teachers and your experience. And again, have a great holiday. I appreciate
Thank
everything.
you.
It gets me through those rough days, Art. It really does.
Well, thank you so much and happy holidays to you too. And thank you so much for extending this opportunity to me and for having me for this talk.